The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Skyrise, our game of the week, discuss making the first play a great experience for others in the school of gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five reworked games. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's going on, Doug? How are you?
I am fantastic, feeling good, better than I deserve. How about you?
Good. Yeah, man. That's what my father-in-law would always say that. So every time I hear it, I think of his voice. It's such a nice phrase. Yeah, I'm doing well. I understand. Maybe I'm jumping too fast, too furious. We'll have to do a second take. But you recently had a game day at your house. And I wasn't invited. Do I have that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, sometimes we have impromptu game days. Michael tends to get his family to the table more frequently than I do. And I don't know if that just has to do with the ages of my kids. I've got the youngest one, so that kind of limits the whole family gaming. Doesn't happen as much as I would like. But I was able to sit down with my wife and my two older kids, and we played a couple of games that went over well. One of them was Bonanza Dahlias,
nice.
Which is, I think they call it an heirloom, maybe their heirloom collection or something like that. And it was reprinted with Beth Sobel artwork. So
yeah.
Gone are the cartoon beans, and you are planting flowers instead. So for those of you unfamiliar with Bonanza is a bean farming game by Uwe Rosenberg that was one of his first games that came out, and you are planting beans, trying to collect them, but the big kicker is that you cannot rearrange the order of your hand. So on your turn, you have to plant the first card in your hand, and if you don't have room in the field for it, you're going to have to harvest the things that are there and put that new, in this case, flowers, and the old version, beans. And I didn't know how it was going to go over. We had just gotten done playing a game that my daughter, my middle child Piper, was in tears as she was winning because things weren't going her way.
Sometimes it's hard.
I don't know. I couldn't quite figure it out. Everybody at the table was like, I'm not sure why you're crying and upset when you are winning and getting everything that you won. But I digress. So I didn't know how well this game would go over, seeing as that sometimes things just don't work out well for you in Bonanza. But everybody seemed to really like it and get in on the trading and trying to collect certain types of flowers. And it did two things that I really appreciate. And actually, you could talk about this as in the second edition versions that we talked about last week. Not as much of a rework that we're talking about this week, but it did two things. One of them was in the original Bonanza, depending on the player count, you had to take different beans out or the number of beans changed.
Sure.
And so it was kind of confusing having it in the box of like, I need to kind of have this somewhat organized by beans so I'm ready to play it again. And it just never happened. It was one of those things where it's like, ugh, I got to hunt for all these beans to take out because life's
hard.
Yeah,
Life
tell
is
me
hard.
about it. Anyway, this game you just shuffle the deck and go. There's nothing changes on player count except for the number of bean fields that you have available, and that's the other change that I appreciate. Although some people might not like it, that there's kind of a lack of strategy. You only have you have a set number of bean fields. You can't get more.
You can't buy the third field, huh?
You can't buy the third field, but it kept the game moving.
I need to try it.
There's no explanation on, oh yeah, at a certain point you can trade in some of the beans you've harvested. It cut that whole teach part out of it and just kept things moving, and you just had to work within the confines of the game.
Yeah,
and I like that because
I love that third field, and some of it. And sorry to interrupt, but some of it's that sentimentality. You know what I mean?
Sure. it takes out the race to get it, right?
Yeah.
Because in the
which
original
makes me
game,
sad.
everybody's like, I got to get that third bean field. You're doing whatever you can.
Yeah.
And this kind of just forces you to work within the limits that you have, which I think works out really well. So my
You
family
still can't change the order of cards, though, right?
Correct,
I mean,
yes.
the core mechanics are there that way.
Yep, and the trading is the same. And I think it kind of makes people, I think not having that third bean field makes people more apt to trade more frequently, because there are times where it's like, if I had a third bean field, I wouldn't worry about this card. But I don't have
keep it moving.
I don't have a third bean field, so I'm going to make that deal, even if it's helping my neighbor out a little bit more than me. So it worked out really well, and of course the art was a joy to look at, and didn't have to deal with bean puns, which was
I don't
nice.
I don't know how I'm going to play it, especially with the coffee beans. And there's always jokes about Dad's going to be collecting the coffee beans again. He's going to try to get all 14 of them.
Yeah. So that was good. It was nice to get some games to the table. There's another one that we played, Alan and Bobby's Block and Guess, which was kind of reminded me of a faster, streamlined, more approachable version of Pictures, if that's possible. And so
cool.
it seemed, it's one that I'd like to play with more groups of people to see how well it goes over, or if it just happened to be a thing that worked really well for my family. But anytime you can play some games, and in that case, a party-style game, and get some inside family jokes going, that'll last a long
got a
time.
winner there.
That's awesome. So how about you, Michael? What's been going on?
Well, just been playing games with you, and middle school game club is going, so that's been fun. Not a ton of gaming as a family. I have two different solo adventures that I'm on right now. I'll just touch base on. One is because we're getting ready to review this game, and I want to open up some of the boxes, and that's Dwarf Romantic.
Sure.
And so I tried to do the old go fishing with my family of, hey, this was game of the year. It's so simple to teach. I think I can get it up and running in 5 minutes with you guys. And after going through that about 2 or 3 times over 2 or 3 weeks, I just started playing it solo at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Great little game that I think we're going to be talking about here in the next few weeks. So I won't say anything more about that. And then on the other end of the scale, I have a game that is all set up that I aspire to play solo, and that's Dead Reckoning. But I just haven't found the 2 to 3 hours to be able to do it yet. And that's okay too. It's set up, it's in the basement, it's ready to go. And then just one thing that's awesome here. I loaned a game out to my nephew this weekend, and I've never really done this before. He lives 2 hours away from me, and I told him, I will take this back at Christmas. And I put up a very clear boundary of like, I'm coming into your house and I'm repossessing this game if I need to, young man.
This is not your game now.
No, and that's Heat, Pedal to the Metal.
Uh-oh.
It's one of those where it's like, beautiful game, just absolutely gorgeous. But it's just been sitting on my shelf. And so this is something that I'm going to try. This is the same group of people that I play Root with at the holidays. We either play Root or we play Catan. They were giving me a really hard time about my 3D version of Catan and all my expansions of Root. And I said, well, hey, if you're going to make fun of me, I'm going to give you some homework. So, when we are a landing spot for new and experienced gamers, I'm actively doing my part to try to grow some experienced gamers. And these are all people that I've been trying to recruit to our local convention here. So that was one fun thing from this weekend.
Well, maybe gives you an opportunity to see them sooner rather than later. Sooner than you would otherwise. Maybe it's not until Christmas, and you get something on the calendar sooner to see them again, which is always nice to see family, mostly.
Yeah, so I haven't done that before, but I thought, hey, let's try this, see how it goes.
I'm curious to follow up on something that popped up on the Discord server that I thought might make a little interesting discussion. And that was the idea of some people talking about the idea of board game imposter syndrome.
Oh,
and the idea that if you essentially don't like the hottest or the most complex game, you're somewhat less of a board gamer somehow, or that you don't fit into the club. What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
No, that's one way to look at it and to take that conversation. I think it's what I know. I'll speak for me. I have had that feeling at various places, including at your house on game night when I first started coming around, because there's the shorthand and people are talking about other games, and I've never put Marco what. Costa what? Jamaica? Like, what are all these games that they're talking about? I just know that I got eaten by a shark out in the ocean and everyone's making fun of me. We played this game called Seventh Continent. And going through that myself of feeling as if I'm an imposter. And then even, just different phases if we're covering a convention or if I'm going to a convention all by myself. I think that that's something that's I don't want to say normal, but it's certainly something that I have felt. But what is that? What's the purpose of the hobby, man? Let's just get together and play some games. Can it just be that simple? The issue is that our family tree has so many branches in it. And here's just one quick example before I send it back to you. Doug and I were setting up to do a games day at Noble Night, and we were getting ready to teach some games that we've had on the show before, such as Point Salad. And as we're setting up, getting ready to teach Point Salad, which I think we did about 27 times throughout the day and had a fun time doing it, and played it again more later on the day when we got back to your house, next to us, somebody was setting up a war game on a ping pong table. Now, this thing might not be a ping pong table, but to me, it looked like a ping pong table.
Yeah.
And that's just how broad the hobby is. And then next to it was a Batman miniatures game that was getting set up on equally sized table. And, it's just, there's so many different types of games in the hobby that I think it's very natural for people to feel like they may not belong. However, my experience has been the exact opposite. It's such a welcoming hobby where people are always trying to convert others, right? Just like I talked about a few minutes ago of giving away a game, hoping that they'll play it so that I have people to play this game with. I'm sure a Wargamer or Batman Miniatures person would have welcomed us in to sit and play. So
yeah. Well, I think that's something that happens anytime you get into a new hobby, right? There's a vernacular, there's stuff that you don't know, and you're, for the most part, just coming in blind. And you have your own experience of whether that's playing Candyland or Monopoly until you get into other more hobby and games like that that make up the quote hobby. And it reminds me of, and I think the onus is on us as gamers to not be condescending or dismissive of the folks that are coming in at the level that they may be entering the hobby. And it reminds me of when I first started playing the guitar and I went to this guitar shop and I was really excited about, maybe I'll get this one or that one. And I called it an Epiphany guitar, and it's an Epiphone. The name is Epiphone. And it's like the guy in the guitar store could have totally thrown me on the bus and made me feel about 2 foot small. And he never corrected me. I found out on my own later, but whether I was watching YouTube or something, who knows what it was back then. And found out, I was like, oh, no, that's not what that's called. But I feel like the grace of that guy in the guitar store not to correct me or to make me feel like an idiot for calling it the wrong brand name is sometimes what happens to board gamers when, you like that game? Or what do you mean you don't know what a worker placement is? And there's that condescension rather than explain or accept. And to your point, when you are in the hobby and you are playing games and you're at a convention, I don't feel that. I've never felt that. I've always felt welcome and things like that. It usually only happens online where people bring out their mass smugness.
Yes.
And that's where it kind of rears its ugly head. It's like, how could you be such an idiot not to know that? And I think that you would attest to that as the time goes on, because this hobby is such a shared experience hobby, that the amount of shorthand, as you would call it, or verbiage that comes from playing one game together with somebody else, that now you and I, because we've played that one game, have a shorthand of the experience, the rules, and everything that goes along with that game that is now a touch point going forward to say, remember when we played that game? Remember that designer or this or that? And so rather than a kind of a textbook of you go and you learn a whole bunch of stuff, every game that you play gives you more information about the hobby and more touch points for you to pull from as far as describing your experience or what gameplay is like. So I think that the imposter syndrome thing, it happens in any hobby just based on learning the information. I think it's okay to like what you like and feel like it doesn't matter what you like. You are still part of the hobby, whether somebody else deems you as part of the hobby or not. And I think it then becomes on us to be good stewards and welcoming to folks that are new instead of being dismissive. If that makes sense.
That's the main thing. For me, that is the main thing. Welcoming.
Yeah.
Right? And that if all of us go through that feeling of, am I really in the right spot?
Yeah.
I know I like to play board games, but do I belong here?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that tears that barrier down the quickest is when other people are welcoming. That's such an interesting connection that you made about the guitar name. It's that's a really good connection to that sense of imposter syndrome. But I don't know if it ends, because there's a depth to the hobby and a breadth of the hobby, right?
Yeah.
So even like you have board game cruises. Well, am I a gamer enough to go on a board game cruise? You have conventions that are now 2 weeks long. Well, I'm not going to use my entire vacation for the year to go to a convention. And so I don't know if I'm ever going to get out of that sense in some sort. What I will say is it no longer feels like I'm the new kid out of middle school.
Yeah.
I whether it's going to a convention or even just trying a game day in a community, we have all different options and opportunities. But no, that's a great thing to bring up.
Yeah, I feel like as time has gone on, I don't know that I necessarily still have that. I have just become more dismissive of the folks that are dismissive, if that makes sense. Like I'm just whatever. That's what they think. I've learned to tune that out better. I think is my biggest thing for overcoming that. Is like, some people like that, and you and I, you're talking about having Dead Reckoning set up, and it's like, how long does that take to play? 2 hours?
Yeah, solo. Yeah.
So to me, it comes down to a thing. It's like, heavy games are awesome, but it also goes down and depends on what do you do for your day job. Is that unwinding to you? And then, you and I were just talking recently after the air. It's where it's like, I have 1 hour chunks at most to try and fit stuff in. And it's like, I don't have the time to play them, even if I wanted to. So I'm not at that point. And so kind of being accepting and welcoming and where people are is important.
Yeah. And I just have one other thing to add. Don't be dismissive of what you're bringing to the table as a new gamer. Yeah. We talk about that new gamer enthusiasm sometimes as it being derisive, but I think there's also something incredibly awesome about new gamers. And so in the Discord, an example was talked about actually Bonanza, bringing Bonanza to a game night and it being a simple, fast game. I'll tell you what, if I'm out in the community, if I'm at a game night and somebody brings Bonanza, giddy up, especially if that's their first time. Oh, Bonanza is one of my wife's and it's one of our favorites. Let's sit and play. And so that enthusiasm can also be contagious in a great way. Yeah. That's the only thing.
All right, cool. Let us know, jump into the Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord to chime in on that discussion. It's happening as of Wednesday. But we'd love to hear, if you have any other feedback on that or thoughts on what we've said. I want to go through my shelf and move on to Game of the Week. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. In the comment box, you'll note I do have 2 games ready to go, but maybe we'll bring those back for next week or in future weeks. Those are games that I've played recently that I'm ready to talk about that I don't think will make the Game of the Week cut. But let's hear about your shelf, Doug.
All right, so the next games on the shelf, this is a CGE Czech Games Edition shelf with a nice little bonus game in there.
Excited
the first one
to hear about this.
is Prodigal's Club, which is a fun game that is kind of a little bit of a sequel to Last Will. But in Prodigal's Club, you are trying to simultaneously lose an election, get rid of all of your possessions, and insult the most high-ranking officials you can. Basically become a complete deadbeat. It's the exact opposite. Instead of trying to gain as much money and wealth, you are trying to get rid of it as fast as possible. And the game keeps giving you more stuff. It's the story is you've inherited this thing, and kind of that Brewster's Millions. Whoever can spend it the fastest will get the treasure hoard. So you're trying to do that, and it's a fun little game on that front. The next one is Lost Ruins of Arnak, of which we've talked on the show before.
Have we?
Which we recently, right? Not too long
all the
ago.
time. Yeah, I'm messing with you.
And then Galaxy Trucker, which is a game in which you are in real time building a spaceship. And then once everybody's built their spaceship, you're adding tiles to your spaceship, and then you then need to face the great unknown. And you're flipping over cards, and things are happening, and your spaceship is blowing up, and you're losing people. Aliens are onboarding, and all of that type of stuff. It's completely chaotic, but I do enjoy that one. And the last one, sticking with the space theme, is a game designed by our buddy Dan, Loon Architects, which is a space game that was loosely based off the mechanisms of Glenmore, in which you are moving you're basically designing a space colony and moving your player around, collecting blueprints and putting them on, and building kind of a tile colony of different buildings and scoring points from there. So that's what's on my shelf this week. Any comments on any of those, Michael?
Great games. I mean, I don't have that. That's a wonderful little shelf right there, Doug. I do have one comment, though. As somebody who's recently reorganized, I did a whole reshuffle of my collection. Here's what I noticed about us, and I think it says something. I don't know if it's incredibly thought-provoking, but I love how you organize your shelf based on publisher, and I organize my shelf based on designer or author. And I just wonder if some of that has to do with our experience with you in the retail and business end, categorizing by company and publisher, and me in the, I don't want to say the research end, but the nerdy collector end of always organizing by designer. So I don't know. That was just one thing that I found very interesting.
I think for me, what it comes down to is that anytime I've tried to organize it in any other way, the best way for me to find what I'm looking for is to find I can find a cluster of games faster than I can find the individual game.
Oh, it's brilliant, Doug. I'm not slamming it. I'm not saying I have a better method.
But
your collection is very tightly organized, man. There's no doubt about that.
If mine was organized by a designer, I don't know how I would ever find any game without mentally studying and having flashcards of, oh, well, this is. But I guess. But you tend to follow designers more on a greater scale.
In a cluster, I do, and I
so
get
it's
into.
Oh, well, that's my Reiner shelf, so I know what I'm looking at. That's my Phil Walker Harding shelf. So you're doing the same thing. You're just different clusters, I guess.
Yeah. And there's my Kramer and Kiesling. There's just Kiesling. Yeah. Sir Richard Garfield. I'm trying, but not as organized.
So for you, anytime adding a new designer is I don't know if I can add your designer without adding 4 of your games so I can find you in a cluster.
No, I'm not quite there yet, but
okay. All right.
Oh, that's great. That's a nice little shelf, Doug. Prodigal's Club is one I want to try. Haven't played that one yet. That's been on my want to play list for a long time. So
All right. Well, before we move on, spread the word about the podcast. That helps us out a ton. Let other people know that you're enjoying it and that we are a safe landing space for new gamers. And contact us
experienced gamers.
Well, that goes without saying. Contact us with questions or comments. Email at gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Skyrise. Doug, give us the stats.
All right. Published in 2024 by Roxley, this re-implements a game called Metropolis. The designers are Gavin Brown, Sebastian Pochon, and Adam Wise. And the art is by Andrew Bosley. You would recognize him from Everdell. 2 to 4 players. It's about 60 minutes to play, but goes up to 90 depending on player count. The publisher says 14 plus. Board Game Geek, for some ungodly reason, has not chimed in on this one. I don't understand it. I'm going to say 12 plus on this one. Where are you thinking?
I don't know. I haven't played it with children yet, and I'm not trying to be coy. It's just I would really need to play this with certainly my 11 and 14-year-old to see what it's like because of the bidding and things we'll get into. But I'll come back to that, Doug. Carry on.
Yep. And then I have this as a light hobby game. I don't know if you disagree with me on that one.
I also have this as a light hobby game. So we have this as a light hobby game.
Perfect. All right. Skyrise is a new game inspired by Sebastian Pochon's 2008 Spiel des Jahres recommended Metropolis. The goal of Skyrise is to earn the most prestige by the end of 2 eras. The game board consists of a number of islands based on the number of players, which are divided into neighborhoods. Players bid to place buildings in neighborhoods with various size buildings of their color with bid numbers on the bottom of them. Once a bid is placed, the other players get a chance to outbid them by bidding on an adjacent neighborhood with a more valuable building. When you win the auction for a neighborhood, you flip your building upright and take the disc on that neighborhood. Neighborhood discs increase the value of buildings in specific neighborhoods. For example, a green disc can increase the value of buildings in green neighborhoods, making them worth more points at the end of the game. The value of patron discs are randomized at the start of the game and hidden, so you don't know which patrons are more valuable to than other ones to collect those. Era 1 ends when one player has constructed all of their Era 1 buildings, and at that point, prestige is awarded based on an island control majority bonus. So whoever has the tallest buildings in each island is going to score bonus points. And there are also 2 panorama cards that contain open goals throughout the game, and they will score as well. And there's a good chunk of those that come in the box, but you're only going to use 2 each game. Players then add all of their Era 2 buildings and add a special Wonder building. Players continue auctions until all of the players' buildings have been constructed. At which point, the first player to construct all of their buildings gets a key to the city bonus, which is extra bonus points. And then, once all the buildings are placed, you're going to rescore the island control and the panorama cards a second time. Players are also going to score prestige from a secret objective they started the game with, and the patron discs that they've collected throughout the game, and all of their structures based on their neighborhood discs and the value that those give out. And the player with the most points wins. So hopefully that is a good, brief description. Normally I can kind of cobble stuff together from different publisher websites, and this one was almost entirely from scratch. So
and it's brand new, so you just don't have a ton to go on right now.
So that is the game Skyrise. What do you like about it, Michael?
I'm a big fan of auction games, so I have to own that. I also really enjoy area majority and trying to sneak into a spot, trying to take over another spot on the board and get rewarded for that. This game has both of those mechanisms. The other thing that I really enjoy about it is the level of hidden information. It's just a little tiny bit. But I have one objective that is secret to me. and others might think that they know what it is based on my actions, but you really don't know until the end of the game. So now I played your copy. You have the collector's edition. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. So and I'm a huge fan of Roxley games in general. I really am. So I just need to label some of that out there. But in terms of the actual gameplay, what was done in just under an hour, the back and the forth, the amount of bidding, with just, it seemed like the right level of thinking in a game where I could still play multiple games in a day or a night. So that's where I think it sits in that light hobby. I do think someone can get this. You're not going to get to start up and take down in an hour, right, that first time. But I do think it is a game that you could teach half of it, come back to for that second phase the next time, and really people are off and running after that, and you could probably get played in an hour going forward. So I know there's a lot, but this game impressed me, Doug. And I'll say more in a bit, but how about you?
Well, it's funny, you have the caveats that you like auction games and area control, and those are two genres that I usually am not a fan of. Mm-hmm. But this game really works for me for a couple of reasons. One is the auctions. I love that the auctions, the value of your bid is on the bottom of each of your buildings, and that information is public. And that, to me, takes all of the stress and the things that I don't typically like about auctions out of the game, because I know what you can bid. I don't know if I'm not stuck with the idea of like, I should not have spent 10 on that location, that type of thing. Go ahead.
I just want to go deeper on exactly what you're saying. The bottoms of the buildings have the value that building is worth. So if Doug is sitting with a 17, a 31, and a 109, and if I'm sitting with a 15, a 40, and a 112, we know exactly what can be placed in order to win that spot on the board. It's similar to Ra, where you have the tiles that information is public and people can see it. And so I'm not holding cards in my hand, and there's not that level of slowdown and analysis that can sometimes come in an auction game where people are placing cards out and there's that back and forth. The back and forth happens openly, but in a way that other people at the table will then talk a little trash, like, oh, come on, you can't let them win that one, to try to get you to spend a little bit more, right? So go ahead.
And it's just a great thing, because you kind of can say, I'm going to walk away from this one and knowing, because the way that the numbers are kind of set up, it's a situation where it's like, I might have the 33 and Michael has the 34. And then my next one might jump up to 40 something. And it's a situation where it's like, I could outbid him, but if he gets rid of his 34, now my 33 is the highest in that range, and kind of fluctuating with that. Coupled with that is that even your little buildings, you're going to get to place them. You're going to place all of your buildings throughout the entire game. And so there is something that's like, I don't feel like, oh, that was a wasted bid. Like, every building gets put out, and it just kind of depends on, like, is this one that I really want to put my foot down and take? Or am I willing to see how it goes? And sometimes you may throw out buildings that's like, I don't really want this one, but if I get it for this low, I'll take it. And I'm just trying to keep the auction going and making somebody else spend, because I don't want anything adjacent. The way that it works is that the first person that starts the bid puts it in a neighborhood. The next bid has to go in an adjacent neighborhood with a higher value. And so, and it also leads to some cool options where there are times where there is no more adjacent neighborhoods, and you can snag something for with a tiny building, or you use one of your big buildings and put it down. So I like that. The other part that I normally don't like is area control games that tend to be hyper competitive, and I need to crush you at all costs. And sometimes you just feel like you're drowning in an area that's like, I just can't build it up enough. And this one, that area control bonus is not overly significant. It's nice to get, but it's not necessarily game changing. And it can be just as valuable to have all of your buildings on a particular color that you're going to score well in is more valuable than necessarily having control on an island. And I like that because it gives you a thing where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to win the area bonus, but I'm getting 6 points for every structure I put in a green neighborhood. Cha-ching, cha-ching, So I'm missing out on 10 points one place and bidding over, then it becomes a thing of it's like, are you bidding over the disc that's in the neighborhood or the color of the neighborhood? Do you want to put, and that little tug of war that's going on throughout the whole game is really cool, coupled with the idea that you have that secret objective and the wonder building that give you kind of a focus, which is often lost in auction games. A lot of straight auction games, you just start up and it's like for sale. It's like, I guess this is valuable or I should have paid this much for it. This gives you at least something to shoot for right out of the gate, which is super helpful in an auction game, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I also want to talk about the timer of how the first phase ends. And I thought that was unique and something that I haven't seen in a lot of other games. But you get two different, I'm just going to call them sets of buildings. If there's a different term that I should use, I'm going to expect that you'll correct me, being the game school grammarian that you are and good friend as well. But you have some buildings that are lower values. And once the first person uses up and places all of those buildings, so they've claimed areas and they don't have any more left, that starts the beginning of the second era. And then the quote-unquote more expensive, and those are my quotes, buildings come into play. But as Doug mentioned earlier, you're going to use all of your buildings.
Yeah.
So somebody like me who is hyper aggressive and who I'm if there's a race, I'm going to get after that race in a game. Well, what that could mean is that, I might be the first one to take us into that second era, but then the other people at the table have a bunch of other buildings left over that they're just going to get to place later on, because if I'm the first one out of buildings, everybody else is going to get to play those buildings. So there was I don't want to say a balanced timer in the game, but it led to a really cool game flow of and some strategic decisions at the end of that first era that I enjoyed and appreciated.
Yeah, I think the other thing that works in this game's favor is that there's simple bonuses, like the bonus structure and what you're going after is fairly straightforward, and it doesn't get in its own way. It's not overly complicated in the best possible way, where it's like, for me, I can focus. It's simple enough that I can focus on the things that I need to focus on without getting lost in a whole bunch of different rules, a whole bunch of different, if this and that, caveat type of fringe areas. And you can just kind of focus on it as you go and pivot. And I never felt like, maybe there was a handful of times where it popped up where it's like, ooh, I'd really like to get that building. But I never felt like, even if I lost that neighborhood or didn't build that one, I never felt like, oh, well, that's it. That's the game. Like, I never felt like each space was inherently more valuable than, and maybe that would come with a whole bunch of repeated plays, but I never felt in a bad position. If that's, I was happy with everything I was building and never, because even if, like you said, even if you're the last one building and you can just kind of cherry pick the locations that are left, that works out great too, you know? So that balance of resting right between the family and light hobby works so well for me that I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the production or some of the pieces? Because I think there's some unique factors to this game. And I know there's an Essentials edition and a Collector's edition, but I do think that people are going to see this game out and about over the next couple of years. This is I would call it probably going to win some awards. I don't think this is just going to fade into the background noise of a bunch of other games. I think that Roxley has a hit. Do you just want, and so people kind of know what they're looking at if they're walking by their game store? Or, go ahead.
I mean, the biggest difference between the games is that the buildings in the deluxe or collector's edition or whatever it's called is are plastic and molded kind of miniatures, wherein the regular edition they're wood. But quite frankly, and so that's one of the difference. The islands in the regular edition are just flat cardboard, that kind of puzzle pieces where there's a 3D element component to the deluxe one. Other than that,
I think that's a big difference. So if people are just walking by and see it, and it looks like you're playing in clouds.
City.
It's a floating city, and it's just kind of cool. I was a little critical. Are these pieces going to fit together? That would really annoy me. And they seem to just click right in place. Yeah. Again, the production quality of Roxley, they just do such a good job with that.
This is one where, looking at the rule book has the regular components in it, whatever's in the regular retail edition.
And that one's called Essentials. So they have Essentials and Collector's Edition.
And that one, I felt like, looking in the rule books, I would not be happy with, or I would be happy, just as happy with the regular version. Like, it's nice having the kind of the plastic buildings and stuff, but the simplicity of the wood buildings is just as good, and it's like, you don't need the game board elevated slightly in the cloud thing. Like, that was just cardboard. I don't care. The edition I have comes with cardboard neighborhood discs. You can get little wood ones, but that was extra. So it's like, even those are the exact same components. So I would be really happy with the retail version of this one, even if I didn't have the deluxe one.
Yeah. The gameplay with the bidding and all those pieces just really work well, and regardless of the edition, I think so.
Yeah, simple turns, moves fast. I love the bonuses. The wonders, which we haven't talked about, are kind of cool. You get this special building at the start of the second era, and it's going to score you some points or give you some sort of ability that you can use. But essentially, in the second era, your wonder is kind of like an end of auction hammer. No matter where the auction is, I can put my wonder down, and it's like, that's it. Nobody else can bid after me. I'm building my wonder, and that's where I'm putting it. And so that's a nice tool as well going into that second round, where it's like, well, could end this immediately if I wanted to. Like, how important is it? And just a couple of those little things that add up to a great whole. I feel a best fit for this is probably going to be a game night or a family that has gaming experience. So if your family is playing a lot of games, you'll be fine with this.
Yeah, I think this, the one place where I don't think this fits as well as other games have that we've talked about, this is not, I don't think it's a great library game or even a great school game just because of all the little bits. There's a lot of little bits. I mean, just to set up and get the tokens out and get them put back together, and if stuff falls off the table, you need those tokens. Those are all pretty important. But other than that, I think it fits everywhere, dog. Not everywhere. Yeah. Okay, that's an exaggeration. What you said. This is a great game night game, and if you're a family that's playing light hobby games, whether that's a dog park or creature comforts or other games that we've talked about in the past, certainly, I mean, hobby level like Wingspan, you're going to be able to get into Skyrise and get it set up, and I think have a really good time.
Yeah, how about skills, Michael? What kind of skills do you have in a game like this?
Yeah, I have tactical thinking and this is a skill that we've been talking about a lot lately, and one it's like, well, maybe I should look at some other skills, but this is such a primary skill in this game. It's a game that challenges players to make decisions based on currently available and frequently changing information, especially as the auction unfolds. You have to be quick on your toes, because I may really want a space and set a building down there, but as soon as somebody builds next to it, the only way I'm going to get that space is if I remove myself from the auction or build in a different space. And just that in-game decision of the auction, and then even just, I know that when we played it, I inadvertently won a few auctions I didn't intend to. So now I had to be tactical in a different way, right? Because I
Yeah.
was bluffing. I wanted you to think I wanted the auction, but then when nobody else went in and played, well, now how am I going to get that to work into my objectives that are in front of me? So
Yeah.
that's where my second one is, that information processing. Just being and comprehension is another way that we say it.
Yeah.
A game that requires players to perceive and understand concepts, ideas, and functions, how the game works, rules, and mechanisms. So those were the skills that just right away jumped out, even while we were playing and going through this the first time, just seeing like, oh yeah, these skills are in abundance. How about you?
I think I have tactical thinking and comprehension, which I think leads into the idea of observation and seeing what bids and buildings your opponents still have left. But one of the things that I kept coming back to is normally this skill is spatial perception. We usually relate that to kind of tile placement or building something. And the amount of time in this game that I spent looking around once you kind of get going of like, ooh, what would be good spots for me? And looking around and how can I get there? And are there any locations that I can steal with a quick bid or things like that? I just found myself looking around the board for available options more than I usually do.
Yeah.
In a great way of saying, okay, how many tall buildings are over there? Or can I get in here on a majority? Can I get, it was almost like one of those things where you're have 10 to 15 worker placement spots, and it's like, well, I could go here, but it never bogged down. So it was all happening simultaneously that I never felt overwhelmed, but I was definitely aware of like, yeah, I'm looking out and kind of trying to find spots that might work for me or which spots, that I don't need that one.
Well, and it's the placement combined with the auction piece, right? The value that you're going to start that initial bid. And that's where my next skill is observation. And we define that as a game that rewards careful watching of details and behaviors in order to understand or arrive at a judgment. There was an objective, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I thought that the objective was out and open, and it was one that was going to get scored at the end of the first era and the second, but maybe it was just an endgame objective. But the goal was to try to get buildings on both sides of the bridges. You got whether it was 4 or 6 points if you had it on one side of the bridge and on the other side of the bridge. And immediately I'm like, all right, I'm going to subtly try to go after that one. So it was just one of those, what you talked about earlier with the amount of bookkeeping that seems to be perfect. There's also enough options to really keep people at the table interested in trying to get a goal that they can capitalize on, right? Because if others aren't going for those spots next to the bridge, well, I'm going to try to capitalize on that. So that observation, not just in the auction, but also as you're going on with mid-game and end-game scoring.
Well, and I remember throughout that game, it was one of those where I kind of looked at all of those spaces beforehand, throughout the game, and I'm like, none of those are really great for me.
Yeah.
So my job is just to block other people from getting that double connection. Yeah, it's like I might want one, but I don't need the other one. And that's happening all under the surface without, you're trying to sneak in there. I'm trying to prevent people from sneaking in there. And none of that's being said, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
That was going on. So there's a lot of cool stuff that the game keeps moving. And if you don't like auction games, you don't like area control, and I say those words and you think, not for me. As somebody that's usually not a fan of those style of games, this one worked for me because it didn't fall into most of the auction and area control tropes that tend to show up in those style of games.
Yeah, and I think it works for a lot of groups too. I would, if you are in a heavy game group, I think this just shares some qualities with other types of games in the hobby that people will gravitate towards. I really do. So I know that's not a skill. Do you have other skills here, Doug, or any caveats or anything?
The only other skill I've got is the resource management, the capacity to efficiently and effectively oversee available assets and having those buildings with the numbers on them and kind of watching and knowing when the right time to use them and when you might be able to sneak in there and when, we've talked about kind of dropping the hammer of, no, I'm taking this one right now, and kind of being aware of what you have and what others have is a big part of the game. But I don't really think I have any caveats on this one. Nothing that glaringly stuck out where I was like, yeah, don't be aware of this. The only thing I had was the idea that there's a standard and a deluxe edition,
Yeah, and there's a lot of bits. That's the only one that I had for if you're taking this out into the community. This, this is going to sound like we're in episode 20 instead of episode, what are we on here, 168. But this is one of those games where, Roxley, you can go ahead and take my money. I mean, I when we're at Gen Con or when I see this, I'm going to run towards it and add this to my collection because of all the things that we've talked about here. And it takes a lot these days for that to happen. I've become much more patient in being able to wait or get in a trade or this or that. But man, I think this is a game that we'll continue to come back to in High Five lists and in our opening segment. It just seems to be a winner on so many different levels.
Yeah, for, I guess, which may be the biggest endorsement I can give, this was one that after we played it, I was like, this will probably never leave my collection.
Yeah.
It has that right level of simplicity and crunchiness married together that I love in a game, in a beautifully designed package with great artwork, so well done. The production is that I sounded like Yoda there. So well done is the production.
The production is yes.
But I knew afterwards, like, yeah, this is a game that if I'm building out a collection, this is one that I would always love to have, and I can't see ever getting rid of it, quite frankly. So that is our game of the week. Skyrise by Roxley. Give it a try if you get the chance. Let's move on to the School of Gaming.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we're going to discuss making the first play a great experience.
Yeah, for others. So this is a big component, and I think this is a place that if you've been in the hobby for any length of time, this is something that you've dealt with in the negative sense, right? You realize after the game has happened that's like, I've done something wrong here, and this is on me. Michael's laughing. Why are you laughing, Michael?
Man, I'm sorry, a little tangent here, but first time I played Shadows over Camelot was at our local regional convention. Keep in mind, this game is long out of print. And I'm sorry, but so this is my first experience with it. The guy that's playing it is using his friend's copy that his friend loaned to him to bring. And the person sitting two to my left is eating a walking brisket taco. And there is barbecue going all over his face, and he's just like trying to not get it on the cards. And I'm like, note to self: do not bring Grail games back to this convention or put double asterisks in it. So I'm sorry, I was visually taken to a place that probably doesn't have anything to do with this segment, but you brought me there, Doug. So that's why I was laughing.
All right. Well, I think the number one pointer. So I think the biggest thing is focusing on giving a great teach. If you want to create a great experience for others, that can be derailed immediately if you're fumbling through the rule book and kind of don't have your stuff together. Let's put it that way. But even more so, I think people can get over that. The number one thing that I think makes a great first experience for people is do not crush them into oblivion. Do not go in there with the idea that this is a game for you to win and to show your dominance. The amount of, if you're teaching the game and other people don't know it, crushing them and just laying waste to everybody at the table may make you feel great, but it is the kiss of death for people enjoying a game, right? I mean, can you think of anything worse than that?
Other than what I had shared, no. I think you really have to be able to just take a pulse of how everyone's doing at the table. If you're trying to make a great experience for others, so if you're facilitating the game, if you're running the game, if you're the game manager, that's certainly a big part of it. You want to make sure that you're not dunking on them like it's the Nerf hoop all day long and saying, "Aren't you having fun playing basketball, kid? Boom, take that." No, that's really good. Yeah.
I mean, I think the idea of, and here's a great way to get around this, I think, because it's a hard thing to get around naturally, right? You're playing a game, your inclination is, of course I want to win, right? And sometimes we just can't help ourselves. And I'm guilty of it as well, of, ooh, I don't even want to play that game again because I won the last time and I think I'll get destroyed the second time, that type of stuff. I think one of the ways that you can kind of help yourself or nerf yourself is point out if it's a learning game and things like that, not to the point of alpha gaming, but point out great moves for the new players, even if they hurt you. So don't sit around and say, oh, I hope they don't take that spot, even though they really should. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut over here. No, that's the time, if it's a new game, to speak up and say, this is a really good spot for you, and here's why and why, if people are learning. Again, not to the point of alpha gaming, of here's everything you should do on your turn. But when people are trying to grasp a game, that goes a long way in extending that kind of goodwill and making sure that everybody else knows that you're there to have a good time and to have a good time for them, instead of you getting to log a W in your game log.
Is there ever a group or a setting where that does not work for you, Doug? Like I know if I'm teaching a game to my family for the first time, and if I do, because you're so good at pointing out, well, if you just do this, that will really help you. What you just said, you're really good at that. But I know if I do that with my wife and my children, they get very upset. So if I'm teaching a game to my family, I cannot do that. Have you ever ran into that?
I mean, certainly there's. I would kind of separate it out of family gaming, and if I'm with new people that I've never gamed with before, or it's like when we have game night and I'm teaching a new game or you're teaching a new game, we're not really concerned about making a great experience for others, because you've already have that built up camaraderie and all of the other stuff that goes along with it, right? And so I almost think that in that case, the personalities come across more, where it becomes, Dad, just leave me alone, let me do my thing. Where if you're at a convention or you're playing with new people for the first time, they're not going to say, Michael, don't tell me what to do. I know how to run this game. So I think it's more of a familiarity thing than it does with the actual technique. Because if you were at Board Game Club and you said that to a kid, none of the kids are going to say anything back to you.
No, just my own. You're right. And I think that the other thing that I'm getting at, though, is I think sometimes there are some people that just want to experience the game. And I run into that in my own house. We recently played Sunrise Lane, where my youngest and I played it, and then we introduced it to my wife. And I was very, very careful to not point out what she should do, even as she went through completely dominating and tripling our score. So that's all. I didn't mean to get on a tangent there, but I know with people that I play games with a lot, maybe that's just me being irritating. But I digress. Moving on.
Well, but I think I think it's everything comes back to what you said, which is the idea of kind of gauging the table and reading the room.
Yeah.
My general inclination is if I'm setting up a game and trying to make it enjoyable for others, when I'm playing with my family or my game group, it's like that's not necessarily what it's about. If I'm teaching it to my extended family, or we're getting together at Christmas, then it's about how can I make this a good time for as many people as possible. One's about just spending time with each other. One's about making good time for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it just changed the kind of the perception of it. And I think you kind of get an idea of whether it's like for you, it's like, I'm not going to do that to you necessarily at a table, without you prompting or some sort of feedback of, I don't know what to do, and usually that's a good time where it comes up, where if somebody's at the table and says, I'm not sure what to do, a great time to obviously jump in and say, here's some things, but then don't leave out the one that hurts you the most. Like throw that one in there as well as an option.
Too late. No, you can't undo that. I did that.
I think mentioning undo, I think that's the other one, is allowing edit and undo, and certainly within reason. I mean, obviously we're not going to go. It's one of those things where I'm not going to reset the board 5 turns ago and then replay it different. That's one thing. If somebody puts their piece down and before the next person starts, they're like, I don't want to do that. Okay, fine, edit, undo. Or if somebody says, I think I forgot to take a resource, then take a resource. Like, we're not going to slow down and do a full audit accounting to see if that resource was taken or not.
Nope,
I think
work day's done. We're here to game.
I think that that level of flexibility and openness allows people to have a good time.
What else you got?
Having a positive attitude is a big thing. Just if you're the one introducing the game, don't be a grouch about it.
Yeah.
And it seems like it may be obvious, but I've been taught games by people that you're like, do you even want to be here? Type of thing. And the last one, and I think this one is the hardest one actually, is allowing people not to like the game because it's okay if they don't like the game, and it may have nothing to do with you.
Yep.
But I think sometimes we internalize that as, I gave a bad
personal
teach.
attack. Yeah.
Yeah, I gave a bad teach. I recommended a bad game. And the ideas of then spending the next 10 minutes trying to convince that person why it's actually a good game, instead of just being like, man, I'm sorry that you didn't like it, and kind of move on.
Moving on. Yeah.
And I think continuing to push and say, no, trust me, you should really like this, then just multiplies and reinforces the bad experience that they had, instead of just like, all right, let's try something else. But it's really hard to do, because a lot of times it's a game that you've invested in, you really like, you enjoy playing, those type of things. And like you said, it can feel like it's a personal attack. When it may not be.
Well, and I came in with 4 different bullets, and that's the first bullet of whose game is it? So if I want everyone at the table to have an enjoyable experience, I just need to make sure that I don't slam that game if it's not my game, right? Yeah. And being able to almost hold some of my opinions until I'm asked, and give it a fair shot, a fair try. And then the other one that we touched on is just cleanliness. If you can, whether it's your game or somebody else's game, just don't be the dude with the brisket walking taco, right? With Shadows of Camelot. Don't be that person.
I hope he emails us.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I hope he's a dear listener. That'd be great, man. I play with him. Just he's got to bring his own games to the table. And then that sense of how you do and keep it moving. I can think of a handful of times, because the more that I play games solo, the more that I play games online on Board Game Arena, I can really take my time on a turn. And that's different than analysis paralysis. So in a 3-hour game, as the game's winding down, and if the game is tight, and if I want to win the game, instead of taking 3 to 5 minutes on a turn, just take the 30 seconds, keep it moving. It's the first game. It goes back to what you said about winning at all cost, right? I think there's also a sense of, if it's that first experience with the game, just really keep it moving and checking in with the table. And then the last thing, and this I have to give you credit for because you do this so well, but if possible, have 80% of startup completed before people get to the table. What I mean by that, have the game set up, have it out, but know those rules inside and out.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by that 80%. So that the only thing that's left is for me to go through an overview, go through the rules of the game, go through how you win the game or the end game conditions, and what you actually need to do on your turn. And then, go from there. I think those are the things that can really help to control.
Yeah. No, those are some great ideas. I agree with all of them. And I think it's something that if we're trying to be welcoming to new players, it's important to make a good first impression and make sure that others around you are enjoying their time and that you're doing your part to kind of facilitate that as well. I especially love the idea of, and there's another one that's really hard for me too, if you don't like the game, if you are a player. So a lot of my stuff I took with the approach of that I'm facilitating or I'm teaching and I'm introducing. If I'm playing a game and I don't like the game, and I know that halfway through. Now, granted, I've played enough games that I've got a good filter on what I do and don't like, so it's not just mopey Doug like some of my kids are sometimes, where it's like, you're not even, you're not giving this a try. You're not, your own kids, and when they're like that. But so I've played enough games, and it's like halfway through the game, I'm like, this just does not work for me. And I have a really hard time disguising it. And I think it's so important too. Yeah. It's so important to do that because it might be. You think
so? I disagree with that, man. You're right. If it's first experience, no, you're right. You're right. I was taking it out of context. Keep going.
Not to ruin the game for other people based on the attitude that you put yourself into. So even if you know that you don't like it, try and stay positive and go through the game. You can air your grievances at the end of the game, but don't make everybody else at the table feel uncomfortable because they know you don't like it. And then they're rushing to try and get it over with and not enjoying it themselves. And I'm unfortunately guilty of doing that several times where it's like I just get into a funk and it's like, I don't like this at all. And I can't. I'm trying my best to put on a brave face, but I can't.
Oh, it's hard though.
So I think as a player, that's a great thing that you mentioned on your list as well. So go on to the Discord. Let us know if there's any tips or pointers that you have of how either how a gaming experience was ruined for you because somebody didn't do something, or ideas that made it wonderful as well. Yeah, I'm going to do an airing of the grievances on the Discord of all the games Michael has ruined for me by various methods. But we'd love to hear from you guys and know what you think on that as well. So let's move on to the high five. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about our high five reworked games, which you might be saying to yourself, Doug, didn't you just do second edition games last week? We did. These are games that are within the same family, but maybe have been reworked either into a dice game or a roll and write, or I've got one that turned into a two-player game, basically in a little bit more rework than just a second edition and polishing of rules. Sometimes
they're
it's
adjacent, they're in the same universe, right?
An overhaul of gameplay that's more than just we changed this rule to make it a little cleaner. These are more of a, like you said, a standalone or a separate game type of thing. So I think that's it.
Yeah. Number 5 for me is one that is, I think this is the third time on the list. It's Dinosaur Island Roar in Right. 2021 release, 1 to 4 players, 30 to 45 minutes. Board Game Geek says 10 plus, but to me this is more of a 12, 13 plus. It's in that light hobby. But it's in Dinosaur Island. I would let Doug describe, but I will describe Dinosaur Island Roar and Right. You're rolling dice, and then you're making your way through the park. I'm not going to say Jurassic Park, but the dinosaur park. by knocking off different combos, and you actually get to draw. And if you just get on the Board Game Geek page for it, you'll see like, wow, there are tattoo artists that are doing drawings on their sheet that mine don't look like that. Mine are half shaded in boxes, but it's a game that I've only played solo. I haven't played with others, but I've played it a few different times, and I really do enjoy it, and I prefer it over the Dinosaur Island, which is a game that I also enjoy. But there's just something about rolling the dice and how those combos unlock. It's one that I keep in my collection, and I look forward to playing down the road with other folks. But that is my number 5, Dinosaur Island, RAR, in right from Pandasaurus Games, and then the design team of Brian Lewis, David McGregor, and Marissa Masura.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'd like to try that sometime. My number 5 is Mysterium Park, which is a reworked version of Mysterium. Mysterium came out in 2015. Mysterium Park came out in 2020 by Libelud, and the designer is Alexander Nevsky and Oleg Sidorenko. Anyway, Mysterium Park. I do what I can, folks, with the tools I've been given. In Mysterium Park, they took out... let me preface that by saying in Mysterium, there's a big kind of divider, kind of gatekeeper board, and there's this extra bidding and tokens. It's a cooperative game, but you get so many guesses and there's just a lot of extra bits and components. And Mysterium Park stripped it out into its base components, which is there is one person that is the ghost that is trying to tell everybody else at the table who the suspect was, where it happened, and what the method of destruction was, as it were. And it simplifies it just down to those steps. And it's easier to set up, faster to play. It can work with a younger audience because you don't have all that rules overhead. And I've just really enjoyed that version and has actually put Mysterium close to the chopping block quite a bit, just based on I can get this one played way faster and get all of the same feeling out of it. So that's my number 5, Mysterium Park.
That's awesome. I grew up playing a lot of Guess Who. It had the little flipper version. I think that was Hasbro or somebody like that. And number 4 is Dinosaur Tea Party. And I know I've talked about this one a lot over the last year plus, but that's because I've played this game about as much as any other game in the last year plus, and it gets played in so many different settings. And Dinosaur Tea Party's Rob Davio, J.R. Honeycutt, and Justin D. Jacobson, the team over at Restoration Games, takes that Guess Who, that Who's It game, and you're trying to use deduction to figure out which dinosaur other people have. Yeah, exactly. So that's my number 4 is Dinosaur Tea Party. And dear listeners, I'll try to not have that on any more high five lists for the rest of 2024 because I know it's been on a bunch of them. And if you want to hear more about Dinosaur Tea Party, episode 71 is where we talked about that. We also had a couple other interesting segments on there. If you're a new listener, we had disabilities in gaming as our School of Gaming topic and art games for our high five. So go back and give that one a listen from almost 2 years ago now.
All right, awesome. My number 4, Michael had on his list that the original was better, and I think I agree with him. But this is still a great version of a reworked game that introduced a lot of people to this game in the first place, and there are a lot of people that think this version is the superior version, and that's Long Shot the Dice Game. We talked about it in episode 119. The original came out in 2009, and the dice game came out in 2022 by Perplexed and Chris Handy. And obviously we have a whole episode where we go into great detail on it, but the idea of combining essentially Long Shot, which is a horse racing game, with a roll and write style game that somehow still manages to keep quite a bit of the racing excitement going and trying to, place bets and have your horse win the race and get the most money. combining those two together in a fast, quick package works way better than it should. And like I said, a lot of people prefer this one than the original. I like kind of the old-timey feel of the original one. I agree with Michael, but this is a great reworking of a game. That's Long Shot the Dice Game, episode 119.
Awesome, Doug. My number 3 is a game that takes just a beautiful set collection and resource management multiplayer game and brings it down to 2 players, and that's Splendor Duel. And 2022 release, Marc-Andre, Bruno Catala, and Space Cowboys. And I like Splendor, don't get me wrong. But what Splendor Duel has done for me with just playing with one other person is very difficult to explain, even in a podcast that is centered on board games. There's something so approachable and competitive and exciting about Splendor Duel. It's a game that I've brought to more than one person and said, here, let's give this a try. And just the back and forth, I wouldn't have believed that could happen with a game that I'm so on. I kind of like Splendor. I like Splendor. Don't get me wrong. I'll play Splendor. But Splendor Duel is one that if I had to only take 25 games with me, I'd want to take that one with me. So I really appreciate the 2-player nature of that one. That's my number 3, Splendor Duel. Yeah,
great choice there. I debated putting this on my list, but I haven't played it enough to feel like I can say that. But it's a great version, and I think it does add some of the tension that shows up in games like Lost Cities. It just adds that kind of tug-of-war tension that works great in 2-player games. My number 3 we talked about in episode 51, and that's Seven Wonders Architects. This one came out in 2021. The original Seven Wonders came out in 2010, both by Repos Production and both by Antoine Bauza. But they used some of the things that they learned from the Seven Wonders Duel, the 2-player version, and kind of added it. And it's a different game in the same universe, but gives you a level of, I feel like it's a stepping stone game where it's like you can play this and then play the regular Seven Wonders drafting game and kind of get used to the iconography and how things work. And the setup of just passing out a wonder and putting the decks together, you're just up and running in no time. And so this has gotten to the table more than the original Seven Wonders for me, which tear to my eye. But
probably makes you sad, I was going to say.
Yeah. But still a great game and an awesome version. So that's Seven Wonders Architects.
Yeah, and that's my number 2 on this list. Sorry to talk over you there, Doug. But everything that you said, the approachability and the fun factor for Seven Wonders Architects, just as people get to build out their different architects. You said that was episode, was it 51?
51.
That game's been around that long already, huh?
No, 2021. We reviewed it pretty quick, I believe.
We were early on that one, and one that I've added to my collection, and I really, really enjoy that game. So that's my number 2. We're back to you for your number 2, Doug.
All right, my number 2, I've got 2 in a row from Antoine Bauza, and this one is coming off a couple weeks ago, Tokaido Duo, which came out in 2023. Board Game Geek says 2022, but nobody in the world in North America got that in 2022. The original came out in 2012, and Tokaido Duo just does a great job of keeping the same type of feel, the same thing that Michael talked about with Splendor Duel. It keeps the elements of the original, but adds the tension that you need for a 2-player game as you're both working up 3 different tracks, and whoever gets to the top of one ends the game. And it's one of those where you've got 3 different levers going, and they all kind of work together, but separately. And I love that type of, it's not necessarily engine building, but I love when things are so interconnected that you can work on different parts simultaneously. And Tokaido Duo does a really good job of that. So that is my number 2, a 2-player game for number 2, Tokaido Duo.
Awesome, Doug. Love the thematic tie-in.
Yeah.
My number 1 is a game that, unfortunately, folks, I may never own, and I'm okay with that. It's a Grail game. It's out of print, and I will not pay $50 or more for Love Letter Batman 2015 release
Thought this
from
might make your list.
AEG. I really enjoy Love Letter. I love that game, and it's one that we reviewed back in episode 75. I have a few different versions of Love Letter. I have the Star Wars version. I have the regular version. The Batman version, though, where you've got the Joker and Batman, it's my favorite superhero IP. So, and real long story, real short, last year at the Gen Con flea market that Doug and I talked about in our episode last week with Pirates Cove, I had it in my hands, but I just couldn't spend the $50 for it.
Is that how much that was? I thought it was cheaper than that.
No, it was 50. It went down to 40 on the last day, and it was gonzo by the time we got there. Or it went down to 25. It was like a 75, 50, 25. It was 50 when it was in my hands. I didn't see it again.
Yeah.
And right now it's been $50 all day long for the last several months. It's one I keep an eye on. But getting back to the actual game, not just why I probably won't own it, it has these just cute little bat tokens, like the yellow belt icon, and just the art and the abilities. I've been very tempted to make my own, but I just can't quite get there yet. But that's my number one is Batman Love Letter.
Yeah, I thought this might make your list. I thought about it as well. I couldn't really justify it because I thought it was it was very much a retheme, a reskin. The caveat is that it fits so well with the theme that it feels like a different game.
A different game. And I think it's one of those, if I owned it and it were in my collection, it probably wouldn't make my list, but it's one of those because I don't have it. It's what I'm in search of. It's my current, I've got 2 or 3 of those games that I'm in search of, and that's where it fits.
All right. My number one, I think we've talked about before in the past, and I like the original one. I just can't get it to the table ever, and that is Bang the Dice Game. Bang originally came out in 2002. Bang the Dice Game came out in 2013 by DV Games, Michael Palm and Lucas Zach. And in Bang, the original game, you have hidden roles. You're either an outlaw, a renegade, the sheriff, or a deputy, depending on how many players you have. If you're the sheriff, you want to kill all the bad guys. If you're the outlaw, you want to kill the sheriff and the deputy. If you're the renegade, you want to be the last one survive, but you need to, the last person you get rid of is the sheriff. And I love the card game version. I love manipulating those cards. There's a little bit more time between people figuring out who you are and things like that. However, I've had some disastrous experiences with that game taking on way too long. There's player elimination. People are out, and they're like, is this game over yet? And it's like, no, we're bad. It's like, it's great for the last 2 people that are in it. But that was an experience, speaking of times where you're making the first play great for others. This was early in my gaming thing, and played it, and it got to a point where the game was going on so long, I started feeling bad while I'm playing the game because other people are sitting there, and it's like, I want this game to be over because I can see it's killing everybody else. Bang the Dice Game fixed a lot of that. It's much faster. You're rolling dice and trying to, your hidden rolls aren't hidden for very long, but it makes up for it in the speed, and you can play 2 or 3 of these games in the same amount of time that it would take to play the original. And that's why I think it's a really good job of being reworked. That's Bang the Dice Game. This is my number one. Any honorable mentions for you?
None for me.
The only one I had is the game Quick and Easy, which simplified the game, and I thought just made it a lot more approachable and easier to play and get to the table, but not enough of a change to warrant being on the list. So, go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything.
Oh, sorry. Those are our High Five reworked games. Let us know in the Discord if there's anything that we missed or what would fit that category for you. Reminder to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on X. We're at GameSchoolerU. Next week, we're going to be talking about Abyss. We're going to be talking about enjoying the hobby when you can't find a gamer and not talking about solo gaming. So what do you do? How can you enjoy this hobby when there's nobody else to game with? And we're going to be talking about hidden gems from very specific years. I think Michael put this one on there, 2011 to 2014. So we'll see what crops up there. So that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.